I have the honor. Fortunately, I'm not the one moderating this conversation. But we have two very capable people. One of them is called Monet Jones. Monet Jones will be moderating us, and Monet is a 45-year-old resident of San Nicolas who has dedicated to community and volunteerism. She earned a bachelor's degree in social work from the Haagse Hogeschool and later obtained her PDG degree from IPA. Monet founded Stichting Kidneys 297 and authored the booklet Transplante de Riñón e Experiencia de un Acompañante Social na Holanda. Give it up for my papiamento. In 2023 and 24, she was recognized as the Director of the Year by the Kiwanis Club of San Nicolas. And additionally, Monet enjoys photography and photography. Now give it up for Monet. Kevin Richardson is your co-moderator for tonight. And Kevin earned his bachelor's degree in human resource management at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences and is currently a coordinator of study and career guidance, an academic advisor, and a lecturer at the University of Aruba. Please welcome our moderators as they take in.
Thank you, Tabitha, and it is my privilege and honor to introduce the panelists and special guests for tonight's conversation at the table. All right? So we begin with Luciano Milliard, who holds a master's degree in law from the University of Maastricht, specializing in constitutional law. He began his career as a junior lecturer in constitutional law at the University of Groningen and later joined the University of Aruba in 2002 as a lecturer and vice dean. In 2010, he became the founding international officer of the University of Aruba's Office of International Affairs. After a brief role at the Aruba Department of Foreign Affairs, he returned to the university as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science. Currently, he teaches constitutional law, philosophy, and policy in the Organization Governance and Management Program, the OGM, and is a PhD candidate researching the constitutional position of the governor. Next to Luciano, we have Dr. Gregory Richardson. He is a cultural anthropologist and an educator at the Instituto Pedagógico Arubano in Aruba, known as IPA. He also serves as a part-time lecturer at the University of Aruba and is a postdoctoral researcher at the Koninklijk Instituut voor Taal, Land en Volkenkunde, KITLV. With over 15 years of experience in teaching, research, and policy development, Dr. Richardson specializes in culture, music, we already had a base a while ago, language, history, ethnicity, identity, and of course, education. His work focuses on ethnographic research, and among his publications is Sibling Voices of Sunrise City, a collection that highlights the Aruban town of San Nicolas. Additionally, his research encompasses Latin American and Caribbean studies. Welcome, Greg. And of course, we have Mr. Rendell De Kort, and he holds a master's degree in developmental economics from the University of Manchester in the UK. As a partner at Cornerstone Economics, he provides strategic consultancy to NGOs and businesses with a focus on economic development. Additionally, he consults for the World Bank on disaster risk financing and also on food security initiatives across the Caribbean. Drawing on his experiences in data analysis, Rendell has developed tools to track and interpret election results, promoting transparency and informed participation in democratic process. He resides in San Nicolas in Sabaneta with his family and is an advocate for data-driven approaches to civic engagement in public policy. Welcome, Rendell. And our special guest for tonight is Jermin Bell. Jermin is a psychologist and community advocate, currently pursuing his master's degree in clinical psychology and also in work and organizational psychology. Jermin is passionate about strengthening the social services, education, and mental health care to empower children and families in Aruba. Thank you for accepting the invitation. So with this, we introduce the panelists and our special guests to have a conversation with us at the table. Over to you, Tabby.
Feel like we're on a television show.
Right?
Just some house rules before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all. This is a non-political event. So we're talking about the electoral process. However, we are not talking politics. All right? Everybody say we're not talking politics.
Wow.
Just making sure. Secondly, at every SC3 at the table event or even just our discussions, one of the things that we like to say is this is a safe space.
Yeah.
All right, so it's a no judgment zone. You are free to share. There is no judgment. We really appreciate your honest opinions and also we respect your beliefs and your opinions. Thirdly, please put your phones on silent. All right? And then lastly, after this session, as I said before, we will have a question and answer format. And so we encourage you, if you would like, if you prefer to not be on camera speaking, but you would like to ask a question, you can do so safely by WhatsApping to 594. What's the number? It's my number. 9052, all right? 594-9052. We'll continuously put the number up just in case. But if you hear something that you say, hey, I would like to ask a little bit more about that, feel free to text it and I'll receive it. I won't say who you are, all right? And lastly, we would like to thank Sede Aruba for co-funding this initiative with us. They jumped in as soon as we contacted them, and so please put your hands together for Sede Aruba. I'll hand it right back over to Monet and Kevin.
Yes, and we will start off the program right away with a short clip. So I request everyone to direct your eyes to the monitors for a short clip.
Are you voting this year?
Yes, I am.
Why are you voting?
Because I think it's important that for us to have a say in who is running our country.
Are you planning to vote this year?
To be completely honest, I don't know.
Why not? Why don't you know?
Because I'm very torn as to who to vote for. And then for me, a lot of things are not clear.
Yeah, understood. So are you planning to vote this year?
Sigurd, most definitely I am going to vote.
Okay, why are you choosing to vote?
Because it's my democratic right and I choose to exercise it. I mean, it's how I reward the government or the people who are in charge of running the country. That's how I reward them, by casting my vote.
Yes. So then the question would be for us to get some information. We'll start with Luciano. What are your thoughts and how could you educate us with regards to voting rights and the importance or not of voting?
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank the Sunrise City Coconut Collective, SC3, for the invitation to be here to share information and to be part of this discussion, this dialogue, this evening. First of all, to answer your question, Monet, First of all, let's lay a foundation. That is very important as we talk about the right to vote, to have that foundation, that legal foundation, very clear. First of all, let's start with our Constitution. For those who are not so familiar with the Constitution of Aruba, we usually use the name in Dutch, de Staatsregeling van Aruba, e Constitution de Aruba en Papiamento. The Constitution of Aruba is divided into several chapters, to be precisely 7 chapters. Just let me run you through this very quickly so you can get an understanding of this document, how it's organized. So in the first chapter of the Constitution of Aruba, we find the fundamental rights. Then the second chapter talks about the government of the country, followed in the third chapter by the parliament of the country. Chapter 4 arranges other institutions in the country, such as the Advisory Council, the Raad van Advies in Dutch, the Court of Audits, the Algemene Rekenkamer, and other advisory bodies. Chapter 5, legislation and execution. Then the judiciary, the judges, and the Constitution finalizes the topics with concluding provisions. Then to zero in on the political rights. So we are very familiar with the right to vote, but there are other fundamental rights that we find in Chapter 1 of our Constitution that are important to the electoral process. The freedom of expression. We are allowed in a democratic society to give our opinion about how the country is governed, about the party that we will vote for, the candidate that we will vote for. We have that right enshrined in the Constitution. Secondly, the freedom of association. The fact that we can set up a political party is also enshrined in the Constitution, Article 11 of Chapter 1 of our Constitution. Then in a democracy, very important, if you do not agree, the freedom to demonstrate, to take to the streets and voice your opinion on what is going on. The freedom of assembly, coming together, this here, coming together, is enshrined in the Constitution, Article 13 of the Constitution. And if it was a political meeting, this political meeting would be able to make use of this freedom of assembly. So the right to vote, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of demonstration, and the freedom of assembly, all laid down in our Constitution. This right to vote, what does it entail in essence? It is a coin of two sides. What are we looking at? First of all, the right to vote tells us that we, as citizens of the country, we have the right to elect the representatives of the people that will represent us in Parliament. That is one side of the coin. Secondly, we have the right to run for office. We have the right to run for the office of Member of Parliament. These are the two sides of this coin, of the right to vote. And this right to vote, as I mentioned just a while ago, it is protected by our Constitution. It's a constitutional right. And it's also protected in international human rights instruments, such as the European Convention on Human Rights and also in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is a United Nations instruments.
And to interject, Luciano, for those that are not familiar with the process, when we cast our vote, what are we voting for actually?
Yes. So in our system, we vote for Parliament. The Constitution stipulates that there are 21 members of Parliament, and we have a parliamentary system that is laid down in the Constitution in the Staatsregeling van Aruba, and thus when we cast our vote, we elect those 21 members of Parliament.
And then what's the difference between parlamentario and a minister?
Sure.
How do you
Yes.
separate it?
Yes. If we remember well from our classes on history, our classes on civic education, staatsinrichting, I'm looking at a history professor next to me here. We learned from the famous French philosopher Montesquieu that you must divide powers in a state, a legislative branch, an executive branch, and the judicial branch. And thus, in our constitutional order that we call Aruba, we have a parliament that I will get to that later, that helps create the laws for the country. And we have the executive, which is the government that consists of the governor and the ministers of the country. So there's a division of tasks within the constitutional system.
Okay, thank you, Luciano. And just a small, Greg, I would like to ask you this question from an anthropological perspective with regards to voting. From an anthropological perspective in the Caribbean, where did we come from with regards to voting versus where we are right now with the right to vote? Could you give us your short perspective on that?
I don't understand the question. So
historically speaking, as an anthropologist in the Caribbean, were we always allowed to vote? Is the question, or is this something that throughout the years that was fought for to be able to, like in the U.S., for example?
Okay, I guess just like any other part of the world, especially in this part of the world, let's say the Americas, it's important to know that our culture of these societies are actually built on actually a history of, let's say, indigenous communities, but also very important colonialism. So after the colonial period and so forth, and of course with African transatlantic slavery and so forth, that formed the basis of our, let's say, the communities, the people that we have living on these islands. And in that colonial period, of course, during the period of, let's say, slavery and so forth, definitely that was not even a choice to be able to vote. And even after slavery as well. So all of these, this took a period, of course, of people, emancipation movement and so forth, within the, let's say, the people of African descent, but people of, let's say, the different cultural backgrounds as well. And during that process, eventually, it was only a certain type of people who are able to vote, so mainly males, and eventually, and thereafter also, females were then able to vote as well. But this was actually a product of struggles of many, many years. So the fact that we are able to vote today is actually a privilege that actually has been given to us by those who came before us through struggle, through blood, sweat, and tears, basically. And that privilege is something that we should hold very dear to us and consider it and treat it as such as well.
Thank you, gentlemen. With regards to time, I'll move on, but later on in the program, we'll come back to, we probably will make linkages with the first question, and then I'll pass the word on to my colleague here next to my esteemed colleague.
All right. Thank you very much, Monet, and thank you, Luciano and Greg, for your insights on our constitutional system and some of the history of voting. But we're going to spice things up a little bit now, right? Because with that said, we're going straight into our opening statement of the night, okay? Now, we all know of situations, right, in which politicians promise citizens to fix the road for them in front of the house, offer them a job or some type of position somewhere in exchange for their vote. Back in the day, you might have been offered a fridge or a washing machine. Yeah, the craziest thing sometimes. Now I've been looking around here tonight, and I see people walking around with very interesting T-shirts on with a statement, and the statement is, "My vote is not for sale." And that is exactly what our opening statement is. My vote is not for sale, or as we would say here in San Nicolas, my vote ain't for sale.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I am curious to hear what our panelists have to say about this, the selling of votes. And Gregory, is it safe to say that this has always been a part of a voting tradition? Because I mean to say, as far as I know, as far as I can remember, it's always been around, right?
Uh-huh.
And so what's your perspective on this? And can you say something about the cultural values?
I think maybe I can start with, even though I wasn't planning to do it, but Calypso. Calypso.
I was afraid of that.
This Calypso was actually sung in I think in the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken, early 90s, and it's by Mighty Talent. It's called "Shut Up Your Mouth."
All right.
And maybe you can help me with the refrain.
Okay. Then.
And this is really epitomizes the my vote is not for sale or my vote is for sale. That concept actually comes forth and that is how many years ago? So more than 30 years ago. So the same applies.
Okay.
He says, I say
shut up your mouth.
You'll be good. The Mighty Talent don't know one thing that we talking about. Politicians my whole life I never seen. All of a sudden going on TV, saying that they is the best vote for them and forget the rest. Right. He is my best friend when election here. Even send me postcards saying Happy New Year. Or when they don't get my vote, is then they just disappear. Now they walking around with hat and coat. They all smiling cause they got my vote. Election done, now you better start. Fix up the Main Street like nothing start. Right. So this is almost 30 years ago. And the idea of vote buying and vote selling actually is a concept that we would say maybe is even part and parcel of our culture. But from a culture perspective, and this is just to maybe veer off a little bit of what Luciano was actually saying. So he was speaking specifically about vote moot. So according to the laws and so forth, the Constitution. But the fact is, especially living in small island states and in communities where everybody know everybody, as they say, you always have the idea of, okay, let's say what we call, in anthropology, they call it reciprocity. So it's sort of a transactional underhandling. And I would even say that voting, in a sense, is also very transactional in general. So, but the transaction is based on, okay, we're voting for someone to be able to manage the country, and you're gonna deposit a vote, and let's say towards a candidate who you feel has the best ability, the best quality, the competencies to be able to manage the country. And that would also mean that that person can also represent your constituency, for example. So in that sense, there is a transaction that's taking place.
Right.
But when we look at it more on, let's say, on the individual level, you also have that taking place as well. And I think maybe further on in the discussion, I guess it'd be Rendell on the economic part.
Yeah.
It also has to do with your position as well. So it depends on how you view, let's say, your position in society, maybe depends on what you need at that moment. That is also something that comes into play. So yes, and morally, you would say, or ethically, it's not perhaps maybe the right thing, but these things do take place. And it is, I would say, transactional on some level, from my perspective. That would be good.
Right, thanks a lot. Rendell, you're an economist, right? So how do you see voter independence being influenced by economic stability, instability, when it comes to these things, the selling of votes?
Okay, that's a good question. So let me just start with saying thank you for having me. For two reasons, actually. I'm very excited to be here. The first being that I'm from South Africa. I'm not actually from San Nicolas. So I'm happy you guys are
Very welcome.
No, because I think that's also very important to note. San Nicolas, if you take the 21 seats in number of votes, San Nicolas represents 3 seats completely. And if you add Savaneva and Pushikito, that's an additional 2. You reach 5, right, of the seats of the 21 that are really on this side of the bridge. That used to be more in the past. Of course, population has grown much more on the other side of the island. So it's even more important for us to really, I would say, stick together and make sure that we vote cautiously, because I think the stakes are higher for this region and for now. Of course. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that I find it curious that you invited an economist. And I'm really happy because my mother keeps asking me, what is the exchange rate for the euro? And I should know that. Of course, I don't.
Right.
And this is obviously much closer to where my heart lies, because economics, in the end, is about understanding behavior.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have a lot to discuss tonight on the side.
All right.
So to get to your question, finally, sorry for the long.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
The floor is
yours. You talked about, and I think Luciano mentioned the right to cast a vote, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a very crucial part of that is that your vote is private. And I think by law, that is the case. But I want to show a very practical example of the difficulties of the implementation of that and ensuring that your vote is private. You might be aware that all political parties, according to the Kiesvoor Ordning, they are allowed to receive a list of all the voters on the island. So the name of the voters are on there, and where they vote. So which STEM bureau they are casting their votes. And because we're not a big island, we're a small island. San Nicolas only has a couple of STEM bureaus. And if you get the results afterwards, and they're specified by candidate, the numbers are so small that it's so easy to deduce if you voted for me or you did not vote for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is really, it goes against the principle of private roles. So I think this is something that needs to be addressed, because if we later want to talk about all the incentives, then this really plays an important part.
Sure. Yeah.
With that.
Thanks a lot. And, Luciano, just out of curiosity, is buying votes and selling your vote actually legal?
It's not legal. It's not legal. No. Our criminal code, our Wetboek van Strafrecht, in Article 44, Book 2, criminalizes this act. So if you promise someone, you try to bribe someone for his or her vote, then this is punishable with a fine of what we call the fourth category, which is we're looking at 25,000 guilders, or you can go to prison for a max of 2 years. Wow. Yes. Okay. Given the fact that we truly believe that the citizen must be free to cast his or her vote. So yes, the political parties, as I mentioned before, have the right, based on the freedom of expression, to share their ideas with you. They're selling something, and you're the consumer. We are the consumers. So that's allowed.
Yeah.
But at a given moment, it is the citizen who goes into the STEM locale, behind the curtain, and this is specified by law,
Right.
The color of the curtain, the height of the booth, Everything is specified in the regulation, and it keeps like very meticulously to ensure that the ballot is secret, it's free, and you cast your vote without pressure from outside. And thus, coming back to the fridge, and years ago, we used to talk about the truc de grace. I mean, truc de grace. We used to talk about having maybe 10 unpaid water bills and 15 unpaid light bills. That we will go to the politician, and Greg used the word transactional. So indeed, many citizens and many politicians saw that relationship as very transactional.
Right.
The politician goes to a home, and the matriarch in the home says, in here we have 10 votes. And thus, they expect the politician to say, okay, how can I secure? Because we're looking at numbers, of course. The numbers count. Many politicians say numbers do not count. The numbers count, right? So how do you then secure those 10 votes that the matriarch says she has in that house? And if she says, well, I have these 15 water bills that are unpaid, will the politician then come forward to secure those 10 votes of this matriarch? And that is why this penalty, to ensure that we stay away from vote selling and vote buying.
Okay, very good. Jermin, I want to hear from you, right? So you're a psychologist from a behavioral perspective, right? What can you say about the selling of votes? What does it say about human behavior in that sense?
What can I say about that? Well, everyone has needs. Everyone has needs, and we are very prone to making decisions right away, and we are susceptible to what's it called? Instant gratification.
Indeed, yeah.
And so if I am able to get the satisfaction right away, I am going to pursue that.
Right.
And we aren't taught to wait for delayed gratification and have the patience and really be informed on what are the consequences of our actions. And so we just simply say, okay, let's do this. Right now, this is the opportunity. Let's bank on the situation.
Right. So,
yeah, that's what I can say.
You all have needs. You all have needs. Very good. Okay, so then, thanks a lot, Jermin. Monet, I have a question for you. Quick question, right? If I was a politician looking to buy your vote, what would I have to offer you?
So
You know what? Don't answer it. Get us in trouble, right? In trouble. So, let's just move on to the next part. I believe you have another video clip coming up.
What would be 3 things for you that would make it clear that I'm going to vote for this person, this party? What are the 3 things that you could think of that are important to you?
3 things. I would say, first off, clarity. Like, show me your plans, but not just luchtkastelen, but what are your plans? How are you gonna reach there? What are we gonna do? How are the people gonna be involved in those plans? What is our input? How important is it? So those are the things. I think I mentioned like 5 already, but
You did. Awesome. Pabo, kita é 3 pontos mas clave kulo decidir para quem bota vota.
Para mim, me pobisa educação. Porque me está hoofd de daycare, dus educação de nas muchanan. Economia, seguro que sim, e financian.
And Jeremy already touched the topic a bit. In this segment, we're going to talk about 5 different themes, and each theme will address it within 5 minutes. No pressure. So we'll start a discussion with the first theme, which is about the importance of informed voting. And the question is then, why is it crucial for individuals to understand what and who they are voting for? And we are usually inclined to start with Luciano with regards to the law. But I want to start with Jermin, seeing that he already touched the topic. And I'm very curious to know from a psychological point of view, what's your take on this question? Why is it so important for people to understand what and who they are voting for, knowing that we all have needs?
Yeah, we definitely all have needs, and we all suffer or can benefit from the consequences of the way we vote as a community. Like we saw with the last election in the United States, I was very much intrigued by how the people voted and trying to understand why they voted the way they voted. And in Aruba, it's a different story, but we are not really informed throughout the whole 4 years of government what they are doing and how it actually affects us, because the languages that they use, we don't really understand what they're talking about, and we don't necessarily have all of the knowledge of what we're supposed to know about and why they are fighting for what they're fighting for, the policies that they are trying to get across. And so I don't know if we are really informed. What we do is during the campaign season, we go on their websites, we follow, we read the flyers that they put out, and then we say we are informed voters. But throughout the 4 years, I don't know if we actually follow the whole government, except for the fights that are really fun to look at on 24 Horas. Yeah. And so I wish we were more informed, but I don't know if we actually do that. And there is so many studies that show why people vote the way they vote. So the way a politician speaks, the words that they use, how they look, all of these things influences our decisions and our votes. And so before we actually cast our vote, before we make a decision, the decision is already made for us by our subconscious mind, because we are habitual creatures as well. And so these things influences our votes right away.
Thank you, Sharon. Jermin. Luciano, could you elaborate briefly on why it's, or how an informed voter can strengthen the democracy?
Okay. Yes. Just to go back to something that Gregory said earlier on, looking at the historical development of this right to vote. So we come from a place where at a given moment in history, only the very privileged had the right to vote. So they would look at how much tax you paid, and you would then get the right to vote, or how much education, formal education that is, that you had. At a given moment, we found this system to be not in accordance with the principle of equality of citizens, and then we introduced what we call universal suffrage. We suffer as universal suffrage, meaning basically everyone, every citizen has the right to vote. So the system that we designed, that we've laid down in the Constitution, it tells us that we are all citizens with the right to vote. We can choose as well not to vote, right? Some countries, you are under the obligation to vote, but we have chosen to say it's a right to vote. And it actually, what the system says is that all decisions, all major decisions taken in the country, they must be carried by the consent of the people. So by going out and voting, you are saying, I make use of my right, I carry my responsibility to give my consent to those who will represent me and take the major decisions that affect my life and the life of my children, my neighbors, my colleagues, etc. So those are the underpinning ideas of the system. Now the practice, how in this democracy we call Aruba, the democracy, Jermin mentioned the democracy in the United States, how in practice these ideas land on where people vote, not necessarily because they understand the system and how the system functions, exactly what you're doing, that you're giving consent to a number of individuals, in this case 21, to make the decisions for your lives. But we have seen in the research, as you pointed out, Jermaine, that people vote based on other ideas. They like how you look because you are pretty. They say, I'm going to vote for you because you're pretty. So it's done. So it means that I do not need to do research on if you can do something, actually, but I'm going to give you my vote because on how you look. You know?
It's not pretty, but attractive.
Yeah.
So you are attractive in a certain way.
Yeah.
The research shows. So not necessarily pretty, because we've had politicians who were not necessarily pretty, but they are attractive.
Yeah.
In the way that they dress.
Yeah.
It gives the idea that this person is knowledgeable, this person is approachable, this person is someone I can trust. You know, so it's the attractiveness that we are inclined to follow and say, you know what, this person looks good, and I'm gonna cast my vote on this for this person, not knowing anything about their policy, the way that they have behaved in the past, and what they think is supposed to be, done for the country. So, just wanted to reiterate the fact that it's the attractiveness, not necessarily pretty. So yeah. Continue.
And people also vote, I guess, also based on, in a sense, is a with speaking, no? So how you identify, you could see yourself in that person. So if that person speaks to you in some way, I like the style of they have the same way of dealing with the specific issues. Often there's a certain level of attraction towards those type of people as well.
Someone who can translate whatever it is that I am feeling, whatever it is that I believe in, and the way that they do it with such power, and it conveys what I want to say, but I don't have the platform to say it because I am not in parliament. I'm going to cast my vote for this person, right? Not knowing if they actually have done work in the past or not. So yeah.
And Rendell, I'm curious to know, how does a well or not properly informed vote impact our economics?
Okay, so I want to start with the question, how do voters feel? Do they feel informed? And for that, I want to show the first slide that I have prepared, because we've done a survey under the voters to understand a little bit about their behavior as well. Yeah,
Well, then-
because the question was, do voters feel informed about the proposed policies of the leading political parties? And in the bars, you could see different levels of feeling informed. Somewhat informed is the biggest group. Not very informed, that's the second biggest group. And then, of course, you have the ones that feel less informed, the neutral, the somewhat uninformed, and the very uninformed. So if you add up those three groups, I like numbers, but my calculations are not always...
Don't tell your mom.
yeah. So we're above 40% there of that group that is not completely informed.
There.
Yeah.
There. And what impact would that have on our economy or
Yeah.
how we run the country?
So absolutely, I do want to come back to that later, but I think it touches on a lot of very important concepts, because in the end, sometimes it feels like you're voting for pretty or beautiful or how we are. But in the end, the decisions that are made on our behalf and have very long-lasting consequences.
Okay.
And these are often not very sexy things to be thinking about, right?
Right.
Sometimes very technical. So just to mention an example, like fiscal policy, who discusses that at dinner?
We can't.
But in the end, I mean, these things you don't want to get as many people involved, different parts of society, because obviously it's going to impact everything from education, to healthcare, for the long term, and especially now with the relationship with the Netherlands, it gets extra complex. So yeah, that's the impact of that, the difference that this can make, basically, of having informed voters.
Okay, thank you for your insights, gentlemen. Very interesting conversation. I have a few follow-up questions, but with regards to time, we'll move on to the second theme, which is factors influencing voting behavior. And prior to starting the question, we'll look at a short clip.
Now, would you say you're a traditional voter? How important tradition is when it comes to voting?
No. For the last 3 or 4 elections, I was no longer traditional voter. No. I changed, and I was like, you know what, I go and vote for who I feel that can make a change. Not because my parents voted for this one, I go and continue voting for that party. No. I stopped that. I used to, but then I stopped it.
Now, how important is traditional voting for you? Would you say you're a traditional voter?
Yes, I'm a traditional voter. Yes, I'm a traditional voter. And that's what it is for me then. Although I do evaluate myself every time, and every time I come up with the same answer. Let's put it like that, because of the 3 points because of point number 1.
All right, great. Thank you for your time, Yos. Enjoy your night.
I appreciate this.
I like the question. Are you a traditional voter? Are you Mabber up That's pretty much what it is.
And you have to respect his honesty and let him own it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Just genuine and authentic.
Yeah. Love it.
Right. Okay, so there's so many different things that influence how people vote, right? So I heard economic stability for what? That was one thing that I heard, but also cultural connections, right? So a lot of times it is who you know rather than what you know that determines how we vote. Okay, so especially in a small community like ours. So I am very interested in hearing what you guys consider to be the most significant factors that play a role in influencing voters. I'll start off with Gregory again, right? So I heard the word tradition a lot of times in the video, right? Being mentioned. But what about things like identity and social relationships? How much of a role do these things play in voting behavior?
Okay, I think when we're talking about voting behavior, definitely I think tradition, identity, culture, all of these things are concepts or things that are connected. And it goes back to who you are, and how you identify. So we've heard different examples of, like you mentioned, different factors that actually influence the way we make decisions and so forth. And it actually goes back from my perspective. What you see is that it goes back to your kuna, where you were born. So these factors, there are different factors in your life that influence the way, let's say, our identity formation. So who we are, how we see ourselves, how we view the world, and so forth. And it actually, even though school, education plays a big role in our formation, the fact is our first teachers are actually at home. We start at home. So if you grow up in a kuna, in your home environment, so the influence of your parents, the way you speak or the way they speak, the languages that they speak, the culture that they have, especially, let's say, if you are part of let's say a religious organization. So just as, for example, you're baptized in a particular religion, so you grew up in that culture you have a sort of a church family. The same goes for the family at home, your cousins and so forth. So all of these things, in that formation, you grew up also in a particular tradition also when it comes to, in many cases, voting culture and so forth. It's just like, you have been always part of this team. And if you decide to jump out the team, or you decide to go to some other organization or some other church or some people gonna look at you like, hey, were you betraying the plan?
You can't just jump ship
You
like
can't
that.
just jump ship like that because we part of this thing together.
Right.
And so, like, met the pop label influence from smaller as you know. And yeah, so but so that is, I would say that has one of the I would say the biggest forms of influence on somebody. So even the way that, for example, we always talk about this, the way we deal with finances, we learn it for the most part, from how we grew up.
Right.
And so that is the same way. And yes, and of course, when you grow, you educate yourself, or you're exposed to different environments as you move out. Then, of course, you're going to be confronted with different ideas.
Exactly.
And that also has an influence on eventually how you make choices. But one of the things that we shouldn't forget, often the choices that we made are also based on different factors. Perhaps maybe how well you're educated on the topic, but also, for example, how independent you are. So, for example, if I have a particular level of schooling, let's say, if I'm financially independent, my position would be still maybe even more independent than someone else, because I would like, whether I choose to vote for that individual or not, it doesn't have much influence, or it doesn't impact me that much, because, quote unquote, I can hold my own. And for someone in a different position, it has a different consequence.
Right.
But just to go back to tradition, I think tradition is one of the biggest markers, and I can understand why people vote based, like the gentleman mentioned. Yeah, tradition.
Yeah.
I can understand why, in a sense, because it's part of who you are, it's part of your identity, in a sense. So that's we're from this barrio, we're from this part of Aruba. This is what we've always done.
Exactly.
And there's a sort of a excommunication, of a shunning that takes place if you vocally say that, no, I can do my own thing.
Right.
And then they're going to look at you like, hey, you're a traidor. You know?
Right,
Even
right.
as within families, to see how deep it goes, that this I'm voting.
Okay, understand. So I can imagine now, for instance, like economic conditions and low employment rates can heavily influence voter behavior, right? So, like if you got a job, and then somebody going to offer you a job, you might say, might move into a certain direction. So Rendell, what would you identify as the most significant factors?
I think inequality plays a really important role, and there's a lot of research to support that as well, that basically the more inequality there is in society, so the bigger the difference between the rich and the poor, the less trust there is in politicians, and the less people are inclined to think about politicians that, this is somebody that cares about us as people.
Right.
And this, I think, is worrisome, because in a lot of countries, inequality has been an increasing problem. And I would dare say that in Aruba as well, that when this difference increases, obviously you're going to have more of this disconnect with politics.
Right.
But yeah, I also have survey results to show. So
Okay.
I have a
Okay.
second slide.
Cue the survey results.
This is a numbers person.
Because we talked a lot about tradition, so this really feeds well into it. It's a pie chart to basically asking the people, are you guys gonna thinking about voting for the same people that you voted last time around?
Indeed.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay, we're viewing the pie chart. There it is.
There it
Yes.
is. Yes.
So are you planning to vote for the same party as you did last time around? And 59% say yes.
Wow. Look at that.
And of course we can talk about the implications of that. That means that the swing voters part of it, or the ones that are maybe you can sway it with policies, with plans. That's a bit of a minority, and I think that also kind of explains the results that we've seen over the years. That indeed, like the people in the video said, a lot of it has to do with the past. So I think you can also make a distinction between two types of voters, right? There is voters that vote retrospectively, so they look at the past, and the ones that vote prospectively. They look at the future. So I think you can also ask for yourself, what kind of voter are you? Are you looking to the future, or are you looking at what was all in the past?
I'm just curious because it seems like there's a lot. So let's say that if they would vote for the same party that they voted the last time, so it's almost 60%, right?
Yeah.
So, but I'm curious to know, perhaps maybe in the past was it even more? Because if that's the case, then that would mean that it's actually there's some level of progress regarding the. So if we look at it on a broader in the broader spectrum.
You would definitely hope so. Unfortunately, it's the first time we do this. But indeed, I think this is a really good case of a need to continue on doing it, and hopefully you guys can participate as well and add your voices to it.
Because 40% is almost half of the people are going to change their votes, and that says something.
There's a lot. Yeah. True. And
there's 40. Almost.
Yeah. So it's a glass half full.
Yeah. Or not voting. Yeah.
Did you have something you need to add to your file next time? As to once we're that.
So the demographic you did. Older.
Sorry, you have to use a mic.
So let's keep it central first. I think we're going to reach to a point that we can actually have the whole table involved in the discussion. So for the sake of time, let's just move on. Thanks. This is very interesting, by the way. So very interesting to see. Luciano, we didn't talk about. I would like to talk about misinformation, right? So I know a lot of that takes place, right? And how do you see that influencing voters in that sense?
Well, that is of course, we live in a time of non-information, disinformation. It's the spirit of the age that we live in. Very difficult to combat. To say this is the information within a political campaign. This is the information that is put out. And how we're going to deal with that misinformation. There are some rules when it comes to the radio stations, the television stations. There are some rules that they need to ensure that the information put out, also in a political campaign, is factual, right? But we know in the political fight, because you want to get the 21 seats, every party wants to get the 21 seats. Many ideas, thoughts, information is used as a weapon to try to ensure that. So it's something very difficult, I must confess, to combat, especially when it comes to social media. Using social media in the political campaign. Of course, this is not regulated by the same rules as the television and the radio. Thus, the information comes out. So it is then up to the citizen to, as much as possible, to screen and say this is not factual. And then use the information that's out there to then make an informed choice.
But are there people who check if the people are following the rules, the radio stations, TV stations?
Well,
do we have a institution?
Well, but part of the when you get your license as a radio or a television, you need to abide by that. If not, the Department of Communication would have to step in and say, we listened to your radio station and the information that was given was factually not correct.
Right.
And then come with a fine. But if it happens in practice, I'm not sure. I haven't heard of a case in which this...
But also anyone can start a podcast.
Exactly. That is why I...
Invite whoever on their station.
Exactly. So, so this is a very difficult topic to tackle.
Yeah.
And once more, the parties will use any weapon to ensure a victory.
Yeah. All right. Hearing all the different things that can influence voters, I can imagine that it becomes confusing for some people, and then some people end up just voting either unconsciously, or even not voting at all, So just to avoid dealing with all of the influences. So it's a lot to take into account. I'm sure the audience also has questions about this topic, so remember to send in your questions via WhatsApp, and then we can discuss them with our guests later. So let's move on to the next clip.
How important is tradition for you when it comes to voting?
Tradition is something too that we have to try to change because it's all your household you grew up in, right? I grew up in, so everybody from my family voting. So, you stay with that, but sometimes you don't have to watch that alone. You have to see what the other parties, what they're planning, who doing a good job to bring something forward. And like I said, I voted a couple of years, I'm not gonna lie, because I was like forced, you know what I'm saying? But now I voted, mita liber kung mita vota pa mim mesmo, pa mim wak, pero me tenho diferente opinião para sobre a maneira mita bisa, mita papamento para sobre a maminho para mim, pero a bira tempo camina com nos meses stop de vota para color de bandeira, para sobre a color de bandeira não te ajuda com nada.
Okay, this theme is about emotional and cultural connections in voting. And Greg already touched the topic a bit because emotional connections and cultural ties often influence voters. So how do these factors, so the emotional connections and the cultural ties, how do they impact a person's choice? And also, can they sometimes overshadow the rational decision making? And I'd like to pose the question to Jermin first, and especially more specifically on the emotional connections, because Greg already touched a bit of the cultural, so I'm curious to know about the emotional part.
Yes. If you look at the real, well, not really, if you look at popular leaders nowadays, they have a very important power, and that is the power of evoking emotion in someone. And they use strategies, they use tactics to evoke it in you. So if they know, for instance, that fear is something that is important at the moment, they will use words that will go, I don't know if I can say this. If it's not all right, you can take it out. Go ahead. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. So they were evoking something in the person because they understand that how many people are entering the country is not something that is popular for the voters. So they evoke it in that way. But if you go more years before, we wanted hope. People wanted hope in the States, and so Obama will go say something else, And right now, Kamala was bringing joy, And I don't know in Aruba what the narrative is at the moment because everyone is speaking different narratives. But the way the narrative evokes something in you and evokes a certain emotion, and if they resonate with you, you will go and cast your vote for this person. And in a way, it is kunst from the politician to evoke this within you. The only hope is that they use it for the greater good. If they're using the strategy to help the community, to help, the greater good. I don't know if all of them do it, but I want to hope that there are people out there who are really working, who are of service of our community.
Yeah, that would be the hope.
Yeah.
And then emotions and economics and numbers are twee tegenpolen. But still, Rendell, the question to you I'd like to pose is, how does the emotional factor in voting impact our, how do they align with the best situation for our finances? What's the link between emotions and economics with regards to voting?
right? So I think a big word here is rationality, which you mentioned earlier as well. And a lot of times people think, well, emotions is kind of like soft, and it is kind of like the counterpole of rationality. So if you're doing something on the basis of emotions, then it's like irrational. And rationality is a big word, and I think it means different things. I think here we have to see what does it mean to be rational as a person. So a rationality on a personal level, and what is rational on a collective level, and these things can be very different. So if a politician promises me a job, it's absolutely rational on the personal level that I vote for him. It might not be ethical, but it's rational.
Right.
So is that good on a societal level? Is that rational on a societal level? No. But as a person, you have to kind of like juggle this rationality question. So that is, I think, very, very complex. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. And then I know, Luciano, constitutional law, according to me, or correct me if I'm wrong, does not really entail the emotional part. So when we talk about emotional connections and how it impacts decision-making and rational decision-making, what's your take on it from a constitutional perspective?
Yeah, sure. So you would not see this in the Constitution, indeed, that it says you need to vote in a rational manner, but that is the value that's under the Constitution. So when these systems were designed, they were designed with rational people, let me put it that way, rational people in mind, that the voters would vote rationally, that the representatives will debate as well rationally, and then based on reason, decision making would take place. But we know enough, and I'm looking at the psychologists and others who deal with the human spirit, we know enough of human nature that we are more than only reason. Thus, yes, at times we take decisions based on reason, so we vote based on reason. We've looked at the programs and we've made a rational choice. And there are times that based on the emotion, we look at the charisma of the politician, for instance, and it touches us, you know. Someone told me a story many years ago in Suriname. One of the great political leaders in Suriname back in the 1970s, he spoke at a rally, and then the people came back and they mentioned his name, and he said, "He heeft gesproken, he spoke." They said, "What did he say?" "I don't know." So it shows indeed the other side of our being, of our human nature, where the words were not that important, but we know that the way the politician spoke, it touched me. It moved me. And because it touched and moved me, that politician is definitely going to have my vote.
Yeah.
So we know enough about politics, on voting behavior, that this is definitely one of the grounds on which people make a choice for a political party, for a candidate even within a political party. It's not necessarily because you vote for a political party mean that you are in favor of everyone who's on the political list. You know, you can maybe vote for a given number because of how the person speaks, the person awakens emotions within you, and thus they get your one vote.
Yeah, but I would say also just to add, so it would seem then that it's different factors that actually play a role in why people cast their vote on a particular candidate. Because then it's not only the emotional aspect, or emotion plays a role, but there's also the economic aspect, also how the person speaks, but there's also the aspect of a strategy that is used as well. Because in our system we have, like you just mentioned, if you have different political parties, perhaps maybe you don't agree with the party, but you agree with that person, or you would like that person to have some level of influence, or you would notice that, hey, I like this person, but this person all the way down on the list, and I know if I cast my vote on that person, in our system, it's like basically they would say you trade away your vote. You know, so there's a lot of factors that go into making a choice, and and I think at the end it's very important that we are informed, and there's always a risk also, and this I should also add. So of course, there's a push for more education for us to become more rational in the choices that we make, but yet sometimes at the risk of we have to be careful also that not coming over elitist. So you have to know all the party programmas, you have to read and this and that, as if people themselves don't know what they want or why they make certain choices. So there's always a level of understanding. I think, I don't know if you've seen this in your research, Rendell, but when you speak to people, people often know what they want and why they make certain choices. And it's maybe you don't agree, but the choices are made based on their rationale. So rationale can be seen from different perspectives as well. Not only from the perspective of being educated from a particular point of view, but for them, it's the rationale for me choosing for a particular, whatever reason at that moment for me.
That's a good one. Thank you, Greg. That was a good way to clausura, this segment or this theme. And we'll move on to the following theme, which is education and civic engagement. And cue the clip. We'll look at the short clip.
How important is tradition for you when you're voting?
No, I'm not a traditional person. I vote for the one I think is the best person to do the job for the island.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so as Monet said, we're going to talk about civic education now. So education that aims to create more informed and actively involved citizens, right? Now, being an educator myself, I know how important the role of education is when it comes to civic education, and especially when it comes to the younger generation, right? But sometimes I myself wonder if we are doing a good enough job at that, you know? So, and I know we have a few educators in here, Luciano and Mr. Gregory. So I'm curious to hear your views on civic education and the role it plays in creating more informed, more actively involved citizens. Let's start with Luciano. Can you give me some examples of educational initiatives?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Unfortunately, it tends to concentrate around the time of election. So then, looking back on the many years, the press will call you and say, we want to set up a show, 5 encuentros, and you come in and explain the electoral system, how the seats are allocated, etc. So I've had the privilege of doing that, radio, television, in the barrios, over the years. But then 4 years passed and there are no other initiatives. And then it's election time again.
That all of a sudden.
And then the calls roll in. But it's not enough. It's not enough. If you truly want to have a vibrant democracy of voters who are informed, they understand the system, they can even explain the system to others, we need to do more. We need to do more. We usually go to the schools. We need to do more via the schools. We need our organizations our social organizations to do more. At the YMC, very, as we say in Dutch, laagdrempelig. At the YMCA, into the barrio, our MFR, that people can come in, get your information on the system so they can understand the system.
Right.
We definitely need to do more.
Yeah, and would you aim that at, let's say, the general public, or let's say the younger generation, up-and-coming generation, that they should be better educated in that sense, so that you can kind of prepare them, for times to come?
Yeah, well, we have to see what is the best strategy. Maybe going just in a Cinto de Barrio for everyone, maybe that will not work. But maybe you have to look at segments indeed. We go for the younger voters, we go for the older voters, and
Yeah.
But definitely we need to find a strategy to have more civic education.
Okay.
We need to know where the people are going, where the groups are going, because I don't know, are there people going to Centro de Barrios?
Very good question.
Do you actually reach them?
Exactly. And
sure.
That to me is we need to become a community that activates. I feel that's my personal opinion. I think we are very passive in the way that we are voicing our desires, our malcontentment with how the things are going in our community. And when we are asked to come together and protest, we don't really do that. The thing is that also we have, I think, maybe this is the reason I have not done any research on it, but because we live with a very high standard compared to other countries in the world, even though most of us have a lot of debt, but we live comfortably, and so we don't really feel the need to go out and protest. But if you go to a place like Venezuela, if you go to Santo Domingo, or closer in the region, these people are really going through tough times, and they really feel the need to go out and be active and say, you know what, I do not enjoy what is happening for a moment. And so in Aruba, I feel like we have a standard that we are very comfortable with, and there needs to be something that is really, really bad before we go like, no, this is unacceptable. But now we're gonna activate. But sitting here, I can't even remember something that we as a community, as a group we as a country said, you know what, we are going out and protest. I cannot remember in my lifetime.
I just want to add, I think, so just going back to civic education, I think civic education can be done, seen as mentioned by Kevin, in different ways. So we have, of course, in the school curriculum, so let's say maatschappijleer and geschiedenis en staatsinrichting and so forth. But often the way it's presented, and speaking as an educator myself, it's often, most kids, when the students, when they get this information about how the voting system works and the staatsinrichting and so forth, it's always, sometimes it's like, it's kind of dry.
It's dry.
And
sometimes they're not ready for that.
And not ready. And so, but especially when you're a young student, you're not really confronted with certain things, so then you don't really understand how what it entails and so forth. And so I think the ways that we go about this as teachers, I think that has to change. So more different, let's say, work form and ways, the strategies to offer this information starting from a very young age. And there are positive signs in the schools where teachers are actually doing this, and where, for example, things as very simple as, for example, how from kleuter level already, how a school actually, or how a class actually is constructed. So often you would have, for example, a klassenvertegenwoordiger. Now, klassenvertegenwoordiger is actually a representative. So that's where we start, for example, or when you're working in, for example, different groups, there's often a spokesperson that gives let's say, the final presentation, and everyone has a role within that group. So that is actually the basis of a democracy, and then you build towards the higher grades and so forth, and then you could even have like mock elections, especially during this time. And you will see, for example, maybe they create their own party, and they have their own colors, their own logo. And so we've seen this across in different schools in Aruba. So that is a very positive sign. So that's one way, so making it much more attractive and more relatable and so forth.
Right.
But there's also many civic education activities of projects such as this one. So yeah, of course we want to congratulate you on this. But of course, there's also, we've seen many programs online as well. So on the internet, especially young groups and so forth. It's very interesting. And with their own style, of course, and maybe not the traditional Centro de Barrio way, what they're
them in
in a different way, and I think that is those are very positive signs,
right?
And but just to go back to Jermin's point, why we are afraid. Okay, so now. So democracy is also very, we should be active. It's not only from the perspective of the politician coming to the barrio, but even when they get elected, and the democracy doesn't end there. So we have to be continuously engaged in that process, holding, for example, the politicians accountable, asking questions. You're free to go to parliament, you're free to ask questions, and so forth. And not just that they're really going to come in your barrio, as we see now, for just a period, and then they go back, and then you never see them again. So that is, but we have a responsibility in that. But I can understand, and this is where what happens, the culture of fear is very real in that sense. And people are people are very aware of the consequences of when they voice their opinion, specifically about a politician or the way certain things are being managed. If we be very honest, for example, I would say I am not in a quarter of an agreement with how education is being run. Hypothetically, right?
Yeah, you need to cover it.
Talking
about
So we speak in code because if one were to express themselves in very critical in a particular direction, they're going to think, I wonder if they're going to sign. I have a master contract yet. So I got to make sure it's secure because I'm thinking of my family, and so forth. You have to make, So what it would mean that even if I want to get another position to get a higher position, these are some of the same people that need to sign the okay for me to get. So these are things that evoke is a sort of a culture of fear, I think, that is very much present in our system, and that is also part, I would say, partially because we live on a small island. But that is also part of being, at least, it's not only for the population, but also our politicians and so forth also have to be educated about these things. Because what is it then? It's in a sense, it comes down to sort of a form of manipulation. Because I am afraid to express myself, no matter how educated I am or how independent I am very conscious of how I express myself publicly.
Just curious to hear, right? So how can the San Nicolas community benefit from a greater emphasis on civic education?